Hello class, my name is Adeline Macan. I'm going to be presenting our Bernardez family case. So this case specifically looks at middle childhood development. So what we're going to be talking about is the assessment components here, the behaviors, needs, and problems, the theoretical perspectives that we might apply to this case, and we're going to be looking at treatment and intervention possibilities as well as sort of a developmental perspective as well. So this should be very interesting. Thank you for hanging in there with me through this presentation, and let's get started. Hello class, my name is Adeline Macan. I'm going to be presenting our Bernardez family case. So this case specifically looks at middle childhood development. So what we're going to be talking about is the assessment components here, the behaviors, needs, and problems, the theoretical perspectives that we might apply to this case, and we're going to be looking at treatment and intervention possibilities as well as sort of a developmental perspective as well. So this should be very interesting. Thank you for hanging in there with me through this presentation, and let's get started. So just to review, the Bernardez family is composed of Mrs. Bernardez Marissa, age 30, Mr. Bernardez Felix, age 35, Danielle, age 9, Nicole, age 7. Nicole and Danielle are Marissa and Felix's daughters. We will be looking primarily at these two girls in terms of the developmental component. The paternal grandmother is Lena Bernardez. She is the more involved grandparent. The maternal grandparents are Jose and Helena Messina. To quickly review the demographics, they are a Guatemalan family, and they have a rich cultural component to their family in this respect. They are a lower middle class family living in a working class neighborhood, and they are a young family as well. So just to review the case really quickly, the Department of Children and Family Services has been referred to the Bernardez family, who presented needs regarding family preservation. The family has recently experienced some disruptions surrounding marijuana and cocaine use. The family was referred to the DCFS by a judge who has sentenced Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez to probation contingent upon treatment for their substance use, counseling, and participation in DCFS-led substance use program. Failure to complete the terms of their probation will result in jail for Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez. As a social worker, I will be reviewing the internal and environmental needs and dynamics within the family unit, as well as talking about some potential interventions. So we're going to start with looking at some of the behaviors, the pertinent behaviors to the case. Mr. Bernardez has been exhibiting some anger. He was in an altercation with Mr. Bernardez due to drug and substance use between him and his wife. He has shown some violent behavior, not severely, simply due to the fact that we are not given a substantial amount of information regarding the nature of their fight. He is hardworking, and he is tried really hard to integrate at his job. However, he's been struggling. He is attempting to quit using substances. He has expressed a desire to do that. Mrs. Bernardez, she also uses substances, and she's exhibited some behaviors of potential negligence surrounding the care of her children. And she has not really shown any attempt to stop using. I would describe her stage as pre-contemplative in terms of motivation. Their first daughter, Danielle, is very academically hardworking and has integrated quite well at school. However, behaviorally, a shift has occurred and she's become more socially withdrawn. The second daughter, Nicole, has been described as friendly. However, after the altercation between her parents and the family crisis, her behavior has changed and shifted to being more distracted, quiet. She acts sad. She talks about imaginary friends at school and has been developing unhealthy attachments to extraneous relationships and has been refusing physical contact with her father. Lena Bernardez, she's exhibited some moralistic behavior. She's very involved in the family. She often babysits and she brags about her family. She's very proud of her family and is currently caring for the two daughters. The maternal grandparents, Helena and Jose, they are acting disappointed and angry and moralistic. They are expressing hostile behavior towards Mr. Bernardez. So to review the problems within the case, Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez, they have experienced a familial conflict. There is anger and substance use, job uncertainty, and child care concerns. Specifically looking at the children, Danielle is going to need help processing the trauma. She lacks support, lacks coping skills, which will be vital for her recovery and development. Nicole needs help processing the trauma. She also lacks support, lacks coping skills, needs help with language and learning. She needs help integrating reality and imagination due to her sort of imaginary friends that she has been utilizing as a coping skill at school. And then she needs help with attachment and boundaries because she has been sort of developing attachments to her brownie leader. Lena Bernardez will need help with childcare during her care for her granddaughters. Helena and Jose Messina will need help resolving and processing the arrest of Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez and what that means to them and their values. A brief overview of the needs, the expected needs, is going to be substance use treatment for Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez to help bring an end to these cycles, motivational interviewing and counseling for Mrs. Bernardez, family therapy, couples therapy, child care, because right now we're in sort of a gray area as to what's going to happen with Danielle and Nicole. And then play therapy. I think that both daughters would benefit from some play therapy to help with emotional processing. And then potentially career counseling following Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez's completion of treatment. That's going to be essential. So looking at the ABCD123 assessment, first we're going to look at the demographic data. The family here is the Bernardez family. That's the client. Age 7 to 35 is the ages because we are looking at the whole family. Help with substance use and family processing. That's the topic of conversation here. The client's statement of the problem, Mr. Bernardez has stated that he wishes to stop smoking marijuana and he wants Mrs. Bernardez to stop smoking and taking cocaine due to her negligence of their children. The children are also showing signs of emotional response to stress and need help with coping and processing as well as consistency from their parents. Now we are going to look at the first component of the ABCD123 assessment, the affective assessment. So what major and minor emotions are troubling the client? Danielle is showing signs of fear, sadness. She's frightened and experiencing some anxiety. Nicole, the second daughter, is happy. However, lately she has been more insecure, potential feelings of inferiority, being aloof, sad. Mr. Bernardez is angry. He's afraid for his family and what might happen, feeling insecure, vulnerable, disappointed. Mrs. Bernardez is upset. She's afraid, disappointed, frustrated, and the extended family is also disappointed, angry, sad, and worried. Is this client sad, angry, and fearful or anxious? The Bernardez family is, as I said, they're sad, angry, and fearful. Are these due to the helping interview or longer-term states? These emotions are due to the conflict between Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez. And then what emotional states does the client wish to reduce? The Bernardez family is feeling sad, angry, and fearful due to the situation they are in legally as well as relationally and socially. How does the client normally handle negative emotions? The Bernardez family wishes to connect back as a family, to reintegrate into their jobs, and to complete treatment. They want to feel less afraid and sad. What emotional strengths does the client have? Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez usually handle stress through substance use, and the clients have been able to regulate their emotions enough to gain probation and look forward to their treatment. Now we move on to the behavioral assessment. What does the client want to do that he or she is not doing? The Bernardez family wants to reduce their substance use and help their children feel happier and more connected. They also want to maintain their ability to function at their jobs. What behaviors does the client wish to reduce or eliminate? The Bernardez family wants to eliminate their substance use habits. However, Mrs. Bernardez does not see her problem as severe. What behaviors does the client need to increase? The Bernardez family wants to learn how to cope with their newfound stressors and manage emotions and unhealthy behaviors. What habits does he or she or children want to eliminate? They want to eliminate substance use and anger, aloof behavior in both children, and help Nicole to navigate imagination and relationships in school. What positive behaviors does he or she want to strengthen? The Bernardez family wants to strengthen their behavior, their family connection and stability. They also want to continue to set a good behavioral example for their children through recovery. Has the client ever engaged in violence towards self or others? The client did experience anger and aggression when Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez had an altercation. Identified the client's strengths and positive social and health behaviors. The clients have a close family unit and a desire to integrate into their community. The oldest daughter, Danielle, has a strong social connection at school with her teachers. Danielle has a best friend is at well, which is a pro-social behavior. Mr. Bernardez has a positive work environment and a desire to maintain his career. Cognitive assessment. Does the client show any signs of memory problems or other problems in thinking? Mr. Bernardez's memories of the crisis event are all intact. Danielle and Nicole have not exhibited any memory issues either. Does the client succeed in a typical classroom environment? In terms of cognitive functioning, Danielle performs in a classroom environment. She is well liked by her teachers and has been able to develop fluency in English and Spanish. However, Nicole's thinking and cognitive functioning has been more concerning. Nicole's thinking is removed and aloof. She has been creating imaginary stories and friends. Does the client report negative or positive imagery about the problem? The Bernardez family sees the recent altercation and drug problem in a negative light. The experience has left an lasting impression on the family, and they will need to process their negative emotions. What rational and/or irrational thoughts were detected in the client's statements? In terms of rational and irrational thinking patterns, Nicole has exhibited some irrational thinking recently. Mrs. Bernardez is not seeing the severity of her substance use and how it has affected her thinking and the relationships in the family system. Does the client show distorted thinking patterns such as overgeneralization, black and white thinking, etc.? The client does not exhibit any cognitive distortions or maladaptive thinking patterns. How would you characterize the client's worldview and values? The Bernardes family has strong morals. They come from families with strong qualms with substance use, which has colored their perception of the current crisis. And then what positive thinking patterns exist? Mr. Bernardes is striving to diminish his substance use, which is a contemplative readiness state of change. Does the client show any evidence of thought disorders, highly unusual thinking processes, hallucinations, or delusional thinking? Mrs. Bernardes is not able to see the severity of her problem. And then Nicole has also been having some trouble with cognitive development in her language. Now we're going to review the developmental assessment. So how did the client handle major maturational milestones of childhood? We are unaware of how the parents have handled any major milestones of their own childhoods. Both Danielle and Nicole, however, seem to have been emotionally and behaviorally affected by the parents' substance use and fighting. And Nicole is exhibiting more behavioral and affective responses. Danielle is mostly exhibiting affective disturbance. Compared with the client's peers, how is the client adjusting to normal developmental issues? Nicole's linguistic development has been noted as underdeveloped. She is not fluent in Spanish, and she is having trouble moving past imaginative projecting. Describe the client's maturational levels in terms of career, intellectual, sexual, moral, and social development. While Danielle is older and has had a chance to develop social and academic confidence, Nicole is not. Nicole is a happy child, but her attachment to adult figures outside of parental figures could point out an attachment disruption. Nicole is also showing some imaginative and play habits that may be interesting to look further into. Nicole is not the only child of the Bernardes family that is struggling. Danielle is also exhibiting some affect change and shifting. Although Danielle is an older child, she is still vulnerable to emotional and behavioral disruptions in her psychological development. Do any of the client's developmental issues relate to the statement of the problem? Compared to Nicole, Danielle is remaining somewhat regulated. Nicole, however, has shown some noticeable dysregulation. What does the genogram reveal about the client's history as it relates to the statement of the problem? The genogram reveals that the substance use issues developed within the relationship between Mr. and Mrs. Bernardes has contributed to the family conflict. How many brothers and sisters does the client have? What is the client's birth order? Mr. Bernardes has 2 sisters and Mrs. Bernardes has a sister and 2 brothers. Danielle Bernardes has a sister, Nicole. Nicole's sister is Danielle. Danielle is the older of the 2 sisters. What problems in the family relationships are revealed by the genogram or by questioning? Mr. and Mrs. Bernardes are experiencing a relational dispute, substance use issues, and behavioral dysfunction. Both Danielle and Nicole are also experiencing behavioral dysfunction. So, looking further into the family history, what family support does the client have? The Bernardes family has extended family that are concerned for them. Although they do not approve of the substance use, they are involved with the family and are helping look after the children. Is the client on good terms with the family members? Mrs. Bernardes' family, the Messina family, are very upset with Mr. Bernardes for not intervening before Mrs. Bernardes' substance use progressed. They blame him for the severity of the anger, arguing, fighting, and substance use. Lena Bernardes is upset, but still looking out for Danielle and Nicole. Has the client achieved a healthy interdependence with family compared with others of the client's culture? The Bernardes family they live on their own and have attempted to build their own circle of friends. They are still very involved with their extended family. However, I would not say that they rely on them in an unhealthy manner. What dramatic events have affected the family? Mr. and Mrs. Bernardes have both utilized substances as an unhealthy form of social integration and coping. Mr. and Mrs. Bernardes were also arrested after having a fight. Mrs. Bernardes used substances in front of her children and was described as having neglected bathing and feeding them. Next, we're going to look at the cultural and religious/spiritual background of the family. The Bernardes and Messina family are both Guatemalan and speak Spanish. What is the client's religion or spiritual orientation? Lena Bernardes is a Christian and practices her religion through strong moral convictions. How closely does the client identify with his or her cultural or ethnic background? The Messina family are a proud Latino family. How culturally is it acceptable is it for the client to seek professional help? Now, this question cannot really be addressed based on the information in the case. We could infer based on what we know about Latino culture, which would suggest that it might be kind of challenging for them to seek help. Does the client's attitude regarding appropriate gender roles relate to the presenting problems? The Bernardes family, they abide by traditional patriarchal values, and Mr. Bernardes expected Mrs. Bernardes to bathe and feed the children. He also views her tolerance and substance use as more out of control. Is the client able to identify the positive and healthy aspects of his or her culture and the part they might play in solving problems? The Messina and the Bernardes family are very proud Latino people and come from a religious background. This may come into play as they seek treatment and resolve feelings of guilt and shame. Does the client appear skeptical that the helping process and the helper are credible methods of achieving these stated goals? The case does not provide enough information to answer this question, but I would like to hear what you all think about this. Now we're going to look at the physical challenges and strengths. Does the client report any medical issues or disabilities? Substance use challenges are visiting the Bernardes family. And how does the client view himself or herself in relation to disease or disability? Mrs. Bernardes does not view her substance use as a problem. What is the extent of the client's current use of alcohol and drugs? Their use is limited to mostly marijuana, which is transitioned into Mrs. Bernardes using cocaine. What is the client's level of knowledge about substance use? Mr. Bernardes may have a longer history of use than Mrs. Bernardes. However, Mrs. Bernardes has begun to use cocaine as well. Does the client have a family history of substance abuse? This is not mentioned in the case whether or not there's a family history behind further back than Mr. and Mrs. Bernardes. Does the client have a good diet and physical self-care habits such as exercise? The style of diet they follow is not mentioned. However, ensuring that both Danielle and Nicole are fed is a treatment goal. Could any medical conditions be causing or contributing to the client's statement of the problem? The substance use is contributing to the current concerns of probation and treatment. Does the client need treatment for substance abuse? Yes, the client has been prescribed treatment by a judge. So now we are going to look at some intervention goals. The first is to attend all drug treatment, marriage counseling, and substance use appointments. Increase Marissa's motivation for change through motivational interviewing. She's currently pre-contemplative. We want to bring that up to contemplative. Then help Nicole and Danielle become socially integrated again and exhibit a happier, more regulated mood. and ensure Danielle and Nicole receive care, food, supervision, clothing, shelter, and other needs. And then also we want them to integrate back into the workforce after treatment. So my plan for intervention: create a personal work plan with Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez that assists in their ability to attend treatment, counseling, program meetings, and arrange child care for Danielle and Nicole when they are not with Lena. And then to contact maternal grandparents to see if they can keep the children on weekends. I also want to increase Marissa's motivation for change through building rapport and implementing motivational interviewing, helping Danielle and Nicole reach their intervention goals. That way, in that capacity, I will implement play therapy to help aid emotional processing and self-regulation for stress and family system conceptualization. And then lastly, we need to create a post-treatment plan for Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez for after treatment. When looking at the life course perspective, we're going to be looking at middle childhood. According to theories of cognitive development by Piaget, the cerebral cortex, which is responsible for higher level intellectual thinking, develops during middle childhood. Both Danielle and Nicole are in middle childhood, meaning that they would benefit from diverse and positive learning experiences and opportunities for creative and out-of-the-box thinking. During this stage, children begin to ponder complex conceptual questions, categorize and analyze complicated systems of ideas and objects, solve problems, develop a self-concept in relation to the environment and other systems. And in addition, this is a transitional stage. It is marked by a it's marked as sensitive, because the child has already been shaped by previous experiences, but the brain is still highly plastic and can be further enhanced by current and future experiences. So I kind of want to talk about chaos theory here as well, in addition to the developmental perspective. Developmentally, Danielle and Nicole fall into the concrete operations stage. This stage is defined by the ability for children to begin to use logical problem-solving strategies. Now, this stage will also ensue some issues and development regarding navigating complex and uncertain circumstances, which can produce anxiety and insecurity in children if not integrated. People receive information through positive and negative feedback loops to indicate the manageability of their circumstances. This theory also points out that positive feedback loops provide context to systemic deviation, which can reverberate change at a rapid rate. This shows how even the smallest change in someone's system of environment can lead to large-scale social, emotional, or psychological change. To ameliorate chaos, groups create cultures which serve as a guideline to maintain homeostasis through limited change and deviation. Both Danielle and Nicole's change in behavior and affect correlate to the onset of the parents' substance use and domestic disputes. This would point out that Danielle and Nicole need help to orient themselves in their systems to ameliorate as much chaos as possible. So when looking at behavior through a social behavioral perspective, the environment and the learned interactions with those environments play a role. The primary environments analyzed are institutions, organizations, work, school, family, and friends. The Bernardez families presenting problems can be looked at through a social behavioral lens in regard to classical and operant conditioning. When looking at the drug use demonstrated by Mr. and Mrs. Bernardez, they are attempting to integrate into their social environments. They were socially accepted whenever they participated in social substance use. Mr. Bernardez also mentioned using substances on special occasions, meaning that it was associated with happiness, positive affect, familial love, and rewards. Danielle seeks rewards through good grades and pleasing adults. Her grandmother told her that if she discloses the information about her family's substance use, then something bad will happen. Danielle is therefore unlikely to do something that will result in a negative reinforcer. She is therefore withdrawing socially in an effort to please. Nicole gets reinforcement for her actions at Brownies and is therefore associating her Brownie leader with positive rewards and reinforcers. Both Danielle and Nicole have experienced negative reinforcement from being around their parents recently due to domestic disputes and negligent behavior from their mother. They have also seen the negative consequences of speaking out about the issues developing in their family and are going to be less likely to do so in the future. So a sub-theory here is cognitive social learning theory. This is marked by self-efficacy, efficacy expectations, agency, and learned helplessness. When looking at the Bernardez family with cognitive social learning in mind, we can observe the beliefs and expectations at play in the actions and desires of the family. Mr. Bernardez comes from a mother who has a strict moral code and views substance use as wrong. Lena Bernardez has strong values and morals and expects her children to be the same. Mr. Bernardez's drug use conflicts with his moral beliefs, which does not reinforce his use. However, his social reinforcement conflicts with his internal ideals. Mrs. Bernardez's family also views family very hierarchically. Mrs. Bernardez may be feeling a conflict between her family's values and the social reinforcement she is getting from her substance use. The Bernardez family is also thinking about their job security in light of their recent issues. They value the work and jobs that they have and are worried about losing their stability. Danielle and Nicole exhibit evidence of social behavioral learning in their behaviors. Danielle is working hard in school to please her family. This behavior is evident in her father's values and expectations, as well as both sets of grandparents. Nicole utilizes imagination and escapism to cope with recent stressors. Mrs. Bernardez also enjoys using stimulants and other substances to cope. Mrs. Bernardez is in an aloof, disengaged parental state. This may be a learned behavior that Nicole is also demonstrating. Now we're going to look at the humanistic perspective. This theory incorporates Carl Rogers and Abraham Maslow's tenets of humanism, positive psychology, and existentialism. This theory is marked by individuals having freedom of choice and self-determination. Individuals are motivated by their search for meaning and the hierarchy of needs. People cannot meet their social, psychological, and emotional needs until their basic psychological needs are met. The search for meaning encompasses 6 primary areas of personal development. These are uniqueness, growth, personal meaning, competence, dignity, and worth. Existentialism would note that each individual is unique and has equal value. Suffering is a necessary part of life, growth comes from mindfulness, and growth also requires commitment. Furthermore, positive psychology would note that the strengths that the Bernardez family possess. This begins with the client, not the pathology. We see the Bernardez family as people who are unique and are searching for meaning and connection in their social system. They have many strengths as a family recently immigrated to the United States. They have successfully borne and cared for 2 daughters. Danielle has done well in school. Nicole has a colorful and strong imagination and sense of creativity. Mr. Bernardez has an attitude of gratitude and has worked hard for his wife and children. Mr. Bernardez also feels strongly that he should set a good example for his daughters and work hard to be worthy of the blessings in his life. Mr. Bernardez also cares about the example his wife is leaving on his daughters and the care that they receive from both parents. This shows that his love and conscientiousness towards the needs of his children is present. Mrs. Bernardez works hard as a teacher and has tried to do the right thing by the children she teaches. Her guilt toward using drugs and the impression she may leave on her children due to her substance use showcases her sense of morality and empathy. Mrs. Bernardez also shows a strong sense of self-awareness regarding how she may come across to her students. Lastly, I want to compare social behavioral theory with humanistic. Social behavioral theory views individuals through a more rigid behavioral lens, whereas humanistic is based on positive traits and the innate goodness within each individual. The social behavioral theory also helps us to see the conditioned emotional responses of Danielle and Nicole. The social behavioral theory also shows the reinforcement and development of Mr. and Mrs. Bernardes's drug use. The humanistic perspective highlights their resiliency and strength, and it highlights the support they have within their family as well as the potential motivation for change. However, the humanism may overlook more nuanced psychological schemas. All right, so now we have come to the final slide, which is my questions for consideration. So do you think Danielle's age and current social and cognitive strengths will act as a developmental advantage in her ability to process and recover from her current familial stressors? A subsequent question to that would be, do you think that Nicole's current cognitive attachment and affect challenges will act as a developmental disadvantage in her ability to process and recover from her current familial stressors? On that note, how might the social worker create a plan for Danielle and Nicole that aids in their developmental facilitation during the middle childhood stage? In answering this question, I would like you to consider their current circumstances. All right, thank you guys for listening to my presentation. I know it was a little bit long, but I appreciate your ears and your analysis and your discussion. And I hope everyone has a great weekend.